Good evening. It's 6:30 and welcome to the joint session of the Planning and Zoning Commission and the Transportation Board. We do have a quorum present. The first item on the agenda for this evening is to approve the minutes from the October 4th meeting. If there are no additions or corrections, may I have a motion, please?
Move to approve.
Motion is by Karen.
Second.
Second by Alvin. Vote now. Motion passes 5-0. The next item on the agenda is a regular hearing. It is the final plat for Castle Hills Crown Center, Lot 2, Block A, on 5.413 acres out of the Harrison-Young Survey, abstract number 1448. It is zoned Planned Development Mixed Use District, located at the southwest corner of the intersection of Crown Parkway and Regent Way.
Good evening, Commissioners. Staff received this plat on October 3rd, and it has been reviewed by staff. We've found several deficiencies which have been listed in the backup. Our recommendation is that the Planning and Zoning Commission disapprove the final plat of Castle Hills Crown Center Edition, Lot 2, Block A, for the deficiencies listed, and delegate to staff the authority to accept and approve the plat once the listed deficiencies are corrected, and bring to the chair for signature.
Thank you, Michelle. Commissioners, are there any questions for staff or discussion on this? Okay, then if not, may I have a motion, please?
Move to disapprove the final plat and delegate to the staff the ability to accept and approve the final plat once that's listed deficiencies are corrected.
Motion by Karen.
Second.
Second by Aram. Vote now. Motion passes 5-0. The next item is another regular hearing, final plat of Texas Instruments Edition, lots 1RA1 and 1RA2, Block A, on 168.32 acres out of the B. Hunter Survey, abstract number 554, P. Harmonson Survey, abstract number 604, R. Thompson Survey, abstract number 1274, and B. Smith Survey, abstract number 1576, zoned light industrial district, located at 2501 South Highway 121 Business, being a replat of lots 1RA, Block A, Texas Instruments Edition.
Good evening, Commissioners. The final plat of Texas Instruments Edition was submitted on October 3rd, 2022, and has been reviewed by staff. The listed deficiencies that were found within the plat are shown in the backup. Staff recommends that the Planning and Zoning Commission disapprove the final plat of Texas Instruments Edition for the deficiencies listed above and delegate to staff the authority to accept and approve the plat once the listed deficiencies are corrected. The approved plat will be brought to the chair for signature.
Thank you, Joe. Commissioners, any questions for staff or concerns on this item? Discussion? Okay, may I have a motion, please?
I move to disapprove the final plat and delegate to staff the ability to accept and approve once the listed deficiencies are corrected.
Motion is by Aram, second is by Karen. Vote now. Motion passes 5-0. The next item on the agenda is a public hearing. This is to consider a recommendation for an ordinance amending the Lewisville City Code by designating chapters 1 through 17.5 of the Lewisville City Code as Volume 1 of the Lewisville City Code, adding a new volume, Volume 2, Unified Development Code, combining and amending zoning and development regulations previously contained in Chapter 2, Administration, Chapter 4, Buildings and Building Regulations, Chapter 6, Land Development Regulations, Chapter 9.5, Old Town Development, Chapter 17, zoning, Chapter 17.5, Interstate Highway 35E Corridor Overlay District, deleting and reserving for future use Section 2-48, Old Town Development Block Grant Advisory Committee, Article 10, Chapter 4, fences, Chapter 9.5, Old Town Development, Chapter 17, zoning, Chapter 17.5, Interstate Highway 35E Corridor Overlay District, deleting Chapter 6, Land Development Regulations, and replacing with a new Chapter 6 entitled Community Block Grant Advisory Committee, amending Section 7-401 to ensure conformance with the Unified Development Code.
Good evening, Commissioners. On behalf of the planning staff, it is my pleasure to present to you the new Lewisville Unified Development Code. It's been a very long journey, but one that was definitely worth taking. And we have a short presentation just to give you an overview tonight. We'll be giving you a brief overview of the overall project. We'll be talking about the major changes, the opportunities of community engagement that was part of the process. And then before our recommendation public hearing, we'll talk about how we will implement this plan. And so with that, I'll move forward with the overall overview. As you probably know, our zoning ordinance was originally adopted in 1971, or at least the version that we currently are using. It's been amended many times over the years, but it was long overdue. Likewise, the subdivision ordinance was adopted in 1988 and modified over the years. It was a lot different time in Lewisville when those documents were originally, when they were originally drafted, and so we've been spending the last few years on this project. And you may ask, why undertake this process? Number one is just to implement the Lewisville 2025 plan. It was one of the priorities in that plan and our small area plans. And again, Lewisville has changed a lot over the last 30, 40 years. And so it was time for our ordinances to change to address the situation that we're facing now with the city mostly built out. And now we're seeing a lot more redevelopment. So this code will facilitate new forms of development. It will promote redevelopment and make that process easier. It'll make the ordinance a lot more user-friendly. Our current ordinances were not the easiest ones to read and were difficult to understand, so I think it'll be easier on staff and it'll be easier on the users of the code. Also, we want to have a code that was more business-friendly. We had a lot of conflicts that we wanted to make sure that we eliminated, and also we incorporated some best practices. As far as community engagement, the overall approach was to have a very transparent process so that anyone that wanted to participate could participate at the appropriate time. We wanted to have a flexible process, have different ways for stakeholders to be involved, and we wanted all of their input to be valuable. That valuable input was incorporated back into the code based on their feedback. The techniques, we had multiple techniques for community engagement: online, social media, newsletters, community open houses, various times through the process. We had various focus groups and stakeholder groups. So we had a wide variety of individuals involved with giving us input along the major steps of the way. And again, all of that was overseen by the council and the P&Z, who gave us direction throughout, several times throughout the process. And then, of course, this is the first step for final adoption, a recommendation from you tonight, and then the City Council next week. As far as our stakeholder groups, the two most important ones were the Code Review Committee and the Technical Advisory Roundtable. The Code Review Committee consisted of key staff members that are involved with the development process, and they were very valuable in providing input and reviewing draft documents and and giving us input on how to best revise the development process. The Technical Advisory Committee was our partners from the development community, our developers, engineers, architects, attorneys that are typically involved from the private sector on the projects that we review. So their insights were very valuable, and they gave us some really good input, and I think it's another very valuable thing too is just their experience with other cities. So they get to work with a lot of different cities and are aware of best practices, and they shared a lot of that information with us. And again, that all went in to make this a very valuable document and with very valuable input. Most of the comments that we received from our public input were very positive and were supportive. It seemed like a reoccurring theme was walkability and adding flexibility to the process and to the regulations. There were a few concerns on a few topics, such as the Mew Streets and designs for into garages, but we found that as we discussed that more and kind of educated the folks that had some concerns, I think they became a little bit more open to that, and I think that kind of informed the revisions in the code. Some comments show that there is a need for more education as part of the rollout, so we've got kind of a plan of attack as far as implementing the UDC. That includes the logistics of new alley cross sections and some of the new street sections. So there's a lot of new information and new ways of doing things, and we'll have to be very careful and deliberate on how we roll that out and work with our partners in the development community. We had our final open house last week on October 25th at the Lewisville Grand Theater. We had 67 attendees. We were very pleased with the turnout. It was a very positive turnout. All of the folks that attended were very enthusiastic. A lot of them just had questions. So they truly wanted to understand what the changes involved. A lot of them were particularly interested in how it impacted their properties. Vast majority were residential property owners, and when they found out that we're adding a lot more flexibility and new tools, they were absolutely thrilled. So there were no significant impacts or changes to the draft ordinance based on comments from the community at that open house. This graphic just kind of shows our overall feedback process, and again, I want to emphasize that was probably the single most reason this ordinance will be so successful, and why we're so proud of it, is the fact that really the whole community had input and informed the final result. As you can see in the far upper left, our consultant team would draft code. Our code review committee would review that and provide input. Then it would go to the technical advisory committee. Then we would go before the P&Z and City Council for additional input and discussion. Back to the technical advisory committee to report what input we received from P&Z and Council. Then the consultants would go back and make revisions, and then we would have an open house for the public and get more input from them. Back to the code review committee before going back to the consultants for final tweaks. So we've gone through this process twice. First for the zoning portion of the ordinance, and then second again for the subdivision ordinance portion. And down at the bottom right where the red circle is, P&Z and City Council action, and that's that first step that we're taking tonight. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Michelle Berry, our planning manager, and she's going to give you an overview on the major changes in the code.
Good evening, Commissioners. So kind of just looking at the general features of the code, the direction we were given was to make the codes a little bit more up-to-date, provide more flexibility, and provide more consistency and predictability throughout the development process. The benefits of those approaches are that we get to reflect current approaches and best practices, we get to simplify the process for the development community and for staff, and that we get to reflect the recently updated Lewisville 2025 plan and the ordinance provisions. We also received direction on the ordinance structure. We wanted to combine all of our development-related ordinances into a unified development code, so all of our zoning and land development regulations are in a consolidated document. The benefits of this are that it's easier to use and find information for all code users. That's council, the Planning and Zoning Commission, staff, residents, and developers. We are able to eliminate duplicate duplicate and conflicting requirements. We're able to use a single set of definitions. We're able to combine our procedural requirements into one section, and we're able to make better use of charts and tables and graphics, which are just a modernized approach and just easier to read and understand in many cases. For the decision-making process, Council directed us to streamline the process by delegating authority where they felt that it was appropriate while maintaining proper levels of oversight. So the expected benefits of this are to shorten our development process time and allow routine and frequent variance requests to be handled by staff with an appeal process. Now, a lot of the routine and frequent requests we've been getting, we've simply addressed with code updates so that those aren't variances anymore. But there are instances where staff can approve a variance, but there is still an appeal process. For infill and redevelopment, since Lewisville is 94% built out, infill and redevelopment is a lot of what we're seeing these days. We know that this is Lewisville's future, and we need to make sure that our codes reflect this. They were written back in the 80s when we were mostly building on greenfield sites, and they were less complicated projects. So a lot of this code is expected to add more flexibility, delegating appropriate decisions to staff, and hopefully that will reduce the developer's time and upfront costs, so that we will facilitate infill and redevelopment projects and achieve the city objective while respecting neighborhoods. So highlighting the major changes that fall under these priorities, one is we have now a two-step site plan process. I do want to be clear that this won't apply to every process, but many developments that are phased or more complex will have a first step of a concept plan. This is a less detailed plan than an engineering site plan, which is a full engineered set of plan. This saves the developer money while still getting some preliminary approval on his documents. A lot of the people on the technical advisory review roundtable really liked this, and they felt that the people that they worked for would benefit from this process. So it will add steps for some projects, but it allows a lot of the big problems to be worked out before it becomes costly to make changes to the site. And if it's a simple, straightforward project, the planning director does have the authority to waive the concept plan. We wanted to restructure the variance process by delegating items that primarily involve professional expertise to staff. So a lot of our subdivision design standards where we're talking about driveway radii and things like that would be delegated to our city engineer. We wanted to use our boards and commissions for items that include some discretion, so including the Planning and Zoning Commission. We did want to retain city council involvement, especially on items that involve design or appearance, and we wanted to provide an appeal option for each process. So things that used to be decided by council, if they're being decided at a lower level, can still be appealed to the city council. So variances and special exceptions would go to our zoning board of adjustment. So that would be things like building height, setbacks, lot coverage, reconstruction of non-conforming uses. Administrative modifications are at a staff level, so the planning director or the city engineer can approve minor parking reductions, deviations of generally up to 10% of a numerical standard, or if it's an engineering standard in Article 4, a lot of that can be approved by the city engineer. Alternative standards would still come to the Planning and Zoning Commission and or City Council. So that would be a waiver of a screening requirement, narrower landscape width, fewer trees beyond the 10% that staff could approve. So there still will be oversight at the Planning and Zoning Commission and Council level. For the zoning districts, we've reformatted all of those to be in a table, which is just easier to read and find the information that you're looking for. We have included lists of all of our special use permits and planned development districts with the case number and ordinance. So if people look at our map and see that there's an SUP, they can actually find those specific regulations or know what ordinance to look for. We've added all of our 3 current overlay districts together in a new chapter, and we anticipate that as we move forward, we'll likely add more overlay districts to that chapter. And we've also created a use chart so that it's easier to see what's allowed in each zoning district, and it'll show you whether a use is permitted by right, if it requires a special use permit, or is not permitted. It also includes a reference to if there's any supplemental standards or use-specific standards, so you can see here what that looks like. The A means that it's allowed by right. If there was an S, that would mean a special use permit is required, and the notes in the last column direct you to any use-specific standards that might be applicable. For residential zoning districts, we're not rezoning anyone's property. We're not changing the zoning district on any particular property, but we are changing some of the regulations therein. So in our residential zoning districts, we are going to allow backyard cottages, which are often called accessory dwelling units or granny flats, by right on larger lot single-family zoning districts. So in the R18, R12, R9, and R7.5 district, you can have a backyard cottages. Now there are standards for those backyard cottages, but they are now allowed, whereas previously you needed to have 18,000 square feet and get a special use permit. We are also going to allow duplexes by right in the R7.5, R6, and R5 zoning districts. And so this allows people to potentially gain more value from their property. We are addressing the demand for smaller houses by decreasing the minimum dwelling unit size to 1,000 square feet for most of our single-family and townhouse developments. And we are making it easier for a property owner to rebuild or replace a small older house, such as we have around the Old Town area. For off-street parking and loading standards, we have tried to reduce and standardize the parking requirement for most uses at about 1 space per 300 square feet of floor area. We've provided a compact car allowance of up to 10% of the required parking. We've allowed building additions up to a certain size and changes of use without requiring additional parking unless you're going above a certain threshold. And we've added a standard that if you're going to exceed 110% of the minimum required parking, that you need to do something to offset the runoff from that, like using permeable pavement or providing additional landscaping. And so that will help offset the runoff, the urban heat island effect, and the aesthetic impact of that expanse of parking. We're also requiring electrical vehicle charging station infrastructure for 5% of parking spaces in parking lots with more than 100 spaces. And this is not that they have to put the station in for the charging, but there has to be conduit and capacity at the panel so that a charging station could be added in the future. For landscaping, we've increased the landscape strip width for non-residential developments. However, there is an opportunity for them to meet other design standards with their building architecture to reduce that. We've provided lists of native and adaptive drought-tolerant species. We've allowed for more flexibility in the placement and clustering of trees. We've put some limitation on turf areas in an effort to reduce water consumption. And we've reduced the number of required trees for new homes. What we've found is that our requirements today often lead to trees that grow too large for the space that they're in, and that disrupts foundations. So we're reducing the minimum required trees on single-family lots. And that we've added irrigation system requirements for drip and bubblers, which are preferred instead of spray heads. For tree preservation, we've clarified the permits needed to remove trees through the site plan and platting process, when no development is proposed, and if it's just underbrush removal. So we'll have these various permit types available if it's not a site plan. Currently, we really just have the site plan process. We're going to protect larger trees. We're increasing the minimum size of a protected tree from 5 inches to 8 inches, but we're reducing the exemptions and we're expanding the species protected. So all tree species in the city would now be protected with the exception of bodark, cottonwood, Chinese pistache, juniper, mesquite, and any Calais pear or cultivar. We'd previously put hackberry on the list of exempt trees. However, we got back our draft urban tree canopy study, and hackberries actually account for 14% of our urban forests today. And so we didn't want to just give a blanket removal for 14% of our urban canopy. So we have left hackberries. Now that's the major change from the open house and from the original draft, is to now protect hackberry trees that are over 8 inches in diameter breast height. So new single-family subdivisions and multifamily and commercial development would have to protect all trees above 8-inch diameter breast height. However, they would get tree credits based on the diameter breast height rather than per tree. So they get tree credits for each tree that they preserve, and they'd also get credits for any trees they plant with their landscaping. They might need to pay a fee if they can't replace trees on the property, but they first have that option to replant the trees on the property, and that's really our preference too, is that we go ahead and get that tree canopy back on site. We've added some exterior lighting standards to establish minimum and maximum lighting levels. We've always had a standard that reduced glare at the property line, but this would say if it's a pedestrian walkable area, there's a minimum lighting level. If this is an area where you anticipate the users would have a lot of light, there are some maximum lighting levels. And we've set a maximum height on parking lot light fixtures, just again to try to reduce all the glare and spillover lighting concerns. And we will be requiring a photometric plan as part of the engineering site plan application to review for that and make sure they're in compliance. For our street and subdivision design standards, we want to implement our complete streets policy where it's appropriate. So one of the things we're doing is increasing the minimum sidewalk width to 5 feet for residential streets and to 6 feet for other streets. We'd have 8-foot sidewalks where required by the park's master plan and trail plan. And we'd require street trees of appropriate species in certain areas to provide shade and protection for pedestrians. We have tried to make the code a little bit promoting walkability by decreasing the maximum block lengths from 1,800 feet to 800 feet. However, allowing pedestrian pass-throughs for longer blocks so that you still have that walkability. We are allowing cul-de-sacs now only as an alternative standard, and it's required that there be a pedestrian pass-through at the end of the cul-de-sac bulb, again, to help promote walkability. We're also adding a new street option, which is a Muse street design, which allows rear entry smaller single-family lots and townhomes when they front onto a public or open space. It could also be a private open space, but those lots would then have their front door to a park or a private park, and then they'd have an alley in the back where they could come in and park. That alley is wider than a standard alley so that it can serve firefighting functions. For our utility and drainage standards, we're allowing the engineer flexibility to approve alternative stormwater designs and to propose best management practices in natural drainage systems. And this is all in an effort to improve water quality and have more natural systems. So we've also gone to increase the width of utility easements from 15 feet to 20 feet, but we're eliminating the building setbacks from those easements. Currently, our code has 15-foot easements, but depending on the type of line, there's an additional 5 or 10-foot building setback from those easements. Those setbacks often get missed. The developer doesn't realize that's a standard, and so they plan their site into those setbacks, and then we have to go through resolving that. Having a wider easement will allow our public services team to still perform the work they need to perform, while allowing the developer more freedom with the use of more of the land. I will say that it's not every utility easement that is 20 foot wide. If it's a large line or a very deep line, that easement does get wider. There's a table and a chart that shows that. We are also allowing water and sewer lines to be placed under pavement for commercial developments with the condition that the property owner is responsible for replacement of pavement if repair is necessary. This is a variance that we've granted a lot in recent years, so we're just making it a part of the code. And we're also allowing performance bonds as well as a cash escrow for infrastructure surety. So that's when the developer's coming in, there's public improvements they need to build. Currently, they need to build all of those first before they can build the private improvements or put up a full cash escrow. This would allow a third option, which is the performance bond. So staff's recommendation tonight is that the Planning and Zoning Commission hold the public hearing and recommend approval of the draft code as presented here today to the City Council for their public hearing on November the 7th. If City Council does approve this Unified Development Code, the next steps for staff will be to implement the code. We're doing a draft state training for staff on the Development Review Committee. It's planned for mid-November. We're updating our application checklists and website information. We're updating our applications with our permitting and development application system, My Government Online, and we're creating forms and templates for applicants. So with that, I'm available for questions. I also do have members of our consultant team here, Phyllis Jarrell with City-Centric Planning and Mark Bowers with Kimley Horn. Richard and I are here. We have various members from our code review committee, the various staff that were involved in the process. And this is a public hearing tonight. And so we're able to answer any questions that you have.
Okay. Thank you, Michelle. At this time, I'm going to open the public hearing. Anyone wishing to speak on this item, ask questions of staff or the commission or some of the review board, please come forward at this time, sign in, state your name. Well, I guess we did a good job. Having no one come forward at this time, I'll go ahead and close the public hearing. Commissioners, are there any questions for staff or discussion?
I got a question for Michelle. Michelle, do you have to have a permit to replace about 3 or 4 sections out of your fence, do you have to go get a permit to replace that fence?
Trying to see if anyone from our building services team is here. I know they have a threshold where it's just considered repair and no permits required. And I think it's a percentage, so it just sort of depends on how much fence you have. I'm sorry, I can get that answer to you, though.
Thank you.
I have a comment that it's about time. We've allowed a lot of things and changed a lot of things along the way, and we've just made it cumbersome to page through all of that, and it was time for us to streamline it down and make it easy for the way the city's moving forward.
And I'd just like to congratulate staff and all of you consultants who have worked so hard on this project. It has been a lengthy project, and what we've seen here is I don't believe we've left anyone out that may have input into this or be needing to use this code without giving them an opportunity to put their opinions into plan. So congratulations to city staff and consultants on doing a wonderful job on this.
Absolutely.
And if there is nothing else, may I have a motion, please?
I'd like to make a motion to recommend approval of the Unified Development Code and associated changes as presented.
Motion by Robert,
Second.
second by Alvin. Vote now. Motion passes 5-0.
Chairman Mixa, the City Council will hold a second public hearing and take final action on the Unified Development Code on Monday, November the 7th, 2022 at 7:00 p.m.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you.
Okay, the next item on the agenda for this evening for the Planning and Zoning Commission is adjournment. May I have a motion, please?
Move to adjourn.
Motion by Aram,
Second.
second by Alvin. Vote now. Motion passes 5-0. We are adjourned. Okay, at this time, I will call to order the Transportation Board. We do have a quorum present. First item on the agenda is to consider the minutes of the June 21st, 2022 Joint Transportation Board and Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. If there are no additions or corrections, may I have a motion, please?
Move to approve.
Motion by Karen,
Second.
second by Robert. Vote now. Motion passes 5-0. The next item is to consider a recommendation for an amendment to section 15-35, maximum speed limits on specific streets of the Lewisville City Code to establish a speed limit of 50 miles an hour on State Highway 121 business from the Sam Rayburn Tollway to 370 feet south of Valley Ridge Boulevard, and make a recommendation to the City Council regarding the amendment.
Good evening, Commissioners. TxDOT has performed that speed study on Business 121 from 370 feet south of Valley Ridge to Sam Rayburn Tollway. And the study confirms that the existing speed limits on 121 from the Sam Rayburn Tollway to the Valley Ridge marker from 60 miles an hour to 50 miles an hour, requiring the code amendment to reflect the new speed limits for the police department to be able to enforce. They set up, if you look at the backup documents, there's a speed study in there that shows you every place. There was 5 different locations where they done the speed study and set it up along 121 between those markers on there. And they went with the 85 percentile to get the new speed limit on 121. And it's pretty much going to make from 35 all the way to Sam Rayburn. It's going to make it 50 miles an hour, where it would jump up as it got close to Valley Ridge, it would jump up to 60. So now it's going to be 50 for the whole stretch.
Okay. What was the impetus for this study?
I'm sorry?
What was the impetus for this study? What called it about?
They do it every so often, like every 3 to 4 years. TxDOT to do a new study just to check the speed limits on the roadways
Okay.
and everything through
So
there.
it wasn't requested by a citizen or anything like that?
No, ma'am.
Okay.
No, ma'am.
Okay. Any questions?
So I don't know how speed studies work. So they set these up and then they're basically monitoring convenience versus safety? I mean, why is their recommendation to lower the limit?
A speed study, how it works is they set up a device to capture the speed in a certain time period during, like normal, it's got to be normal weather, it's got to be at least 200 cars, and they're looking, once they get so many cars, they'll take and do a figure where it's the 85 percentile, so it's not the fastest, it's not the slowest, it's, they're trying to figure out what the average speed of the traveler is in that zone. Then they go through all the zones that they got set up and create your average.
So they're saying that the 50 miles per hour is the speed that most people were traveling? They weren't going 60 or higher?
Correct. There are some that are going higher, but it's the 85 percentile of the speed that's traveled. Any other questions?
Commissioners, anything else? Thank you. Any discussion on this item? If not, may I have a motion, please?
I recommend approval of ordinance as presented.
Motion by Aram.
Second.
Second by Alvin. Vote now. No problem. Motion passes 5-0. And the final item on the agenda tonight is the adjournment. May I have a motion, please?
Move to adjourn.
Motion by Aram. Second. Second by Karen. Vote now. Motion passes 5-0. We are adjourned.